This is Marcus Flowers, aka One Marcus Flowers on all social media platforms, aka Flow, aka Call Me What You Want, Just Don't Call Me Lazy. And before we begin, I would just like to say thank you for commenting, subscribing, listening, liking, all of the podcasts powered by 26 and Glencoe Network. That is the Super Flow Roll Podcast, the Metro Meta Podcast, Dust Off the Cartridge Podcast, Nay's Neighborhood, and this one, the Fantastic Flow Podcast. And I know it's been a minute since there has been an edition of the Fantastic Flow Podcast, but that's just because life has been getting in the way. Well, not getting in the way, but just like opportunities have come up that I've had to take advantage of, and unfortunately, the Fantastic Flow Podcast had to take a back seat. But we are officially back, and before I begin, we're in the midst of our Power Week, so if you haven't checked it out already, check out Dust Off the Cartridge, where we've talked about Sonic's Fox, our games of the year, Fallout 76 and how terrible that game is. Check out the Super Flow Bro Podcast, where we talk about a plethora of things, including Dwight Howard, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Disney's Slaughter of 2019. Check out the latest edition of the Metro Meta Podcast, where Momo talks about Black Clover and how it relates to everyday society. And this is coming out on Thursday, so be on the lookout for the Volume 1, Episode 4 of the Fantastic Flow Podcast. And today's episode, today's edition, we are going to be honoring the legend, the late, the great, one of a kind, a Marvel Comics creator, Stan Lee. And it's been very difficult to talk about the loss of Stan Lee, because it felt like when Stan Lee died, it felt like I was losing a father figure, a grandfather, a great uncle, a distant cousin who always implemented knowledge on me. My first comic book was created by Stan Lee. I bought my first comic book in about 2002, 2003, and it was the Fantastic Four. It was their 50th or 20. It was their 50th anniversary, and it was a graphic novel, but it was the silver limited edition, and it was a collection of the first 40 issues of the Fantastic Four, which Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and all of them wrote and created. And I don't think people realize the genius that was Stan Lee. And just looking back, Stan Lee was always on the right part of history. And when it came to even like civil rights, like he did the perfect allegory with civil rights, with the X-Men, with Magneto being Malcolm X and Professor Xavier being Martin Luther King. He also dared to be great. In 1968, when people feared equal rights in the civil rights movement, and right after the death of Martin Luther King, he created the character Black Panther, and a lot of his fellow editors and writers and comic book creators were telling him to change the name of Black Panther just because of the times that we're in, and they wanted to call it the Beige Panther or something of that nature. But Stan Lee stuck to his guns, and he said this is what the world needed. And the biggest example of this was his creation of Spider-Man. And he says that although Peter Parker is white, anybody can be Spider-Man under the hood.
I was sitting thinking of it, trying to think of an idea, and I saw a fly crawling on a wall. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be something if we had a hero who could crawl on walls like a fly? So I said, yeah, that's great. Now, then I need a name. So I thought, Fly Man? That didn't sound dramatic enough. Insect Man? No. And I went down a list, and then I got to Spider-Man. And somehow, Spider-Man, it sounded a little scary, it sounded impressive. So I said, I'll call him Spider-Man. I wanted him to be, Spider-Man, to be a teenager, but I'd make him a different kind. He wouldn't be a sidekick. He would be the hero. And again, to make him empathetic with the readers, I figured I would let him be not that good looking, not that successful with girls. He doesn't have a lot of money. In fact, he doesn't have enough money. He's an orphan who lives with his aunt and uncle. I thought that would make him relatable to a lot of kids.
And that's just important, because especially during times like these, when we have new characters such as Miles Morales and Riri Williams, and even when Falcon, who was a Stan Lee creation, became Captain America, like that, Sam Wilson becoming Captain America was part of the vision that Stan Lee had, because Captain America is just a symbol, it's just a figure. It doesn't matter who you are on the outside. What matters is who's the person, who you are inside. And that's always resonated to me, and I've always tried to strive to be my best. He's always been more than just a comic book writer, comic book creator. He has been an individual who has he used his medium to get a message that necessarily wasn't popular at the time. When it came to just everything, like it's still hard to, it's still like I'm still processing his death, and it's very difficult to talk about this. Not talk about it, but just like try to explain my feelings in a thought out way. But what Stan Lee is just, not only was he a person who used his platform, who used his medium to get his message to the masses, he also wanted I've been like mistaken, but he also was a hit maker. Like, he created the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, X-Men, Captain America, Namor, the Hulk, Daredevil, the list goes on and on. Actually, I was looking it up. Ant-Man, Peggy Carter, Nick Fury, Spider-Woman, Agent X, Ape-Man, the Avengers, Black Bolt, the Inhumans, Captain Marvel, Sharon Carter, Catman, Doctor Doom, Dormammu, Doctor Strange. Oh wait, nope, not Doctor Strange. Elektra, Falcon. The list just goes on and on and on. And he was creating characters for about however many years, and it proves that innovation doesn't die, because he was writing comics, and then at the age of 39, he really just started to crank out the hits of Marvel for Marvel. And one of the things that you have to give Marvel Comics and Stan Lee credit for is that what he created was organic. Marvel Comics was an organic thought. It was an organic company. It started from the ground up, compared to DC, who basically, like, this isn't a diss to DC, but what DC did was they basically took a whole bunch of smaller comic book companies and put them under their full umbrella. And so it's just like the difference between that. It's just like, I think people fail to realize how much of a genius this man was, because not only was he not only was he creating these comic book characters and writing stories for them and having storylines and having them interact, he also had to be a businessman and also know that every other comic was still the competition. And although later in his life, towards the end, there were medical issues and medical purposes that like held him back from being his full self anymore, he lived a great and hopefully a fulfilling life. And I haven't seen it yet, but in Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse, they said Stan Lee's last cameo with in the animated film was such a Stan Lee thing. And I say that just because Stan Lee, I think about just like the care, like he took care of all of his creations, but it just seemed like he had a special bond with Spider-Man. Like it felt like he related to Spider-Man just a tad bit more than he did some of his other creations. Not to say that he didn't put the same care and effort into them. It's just that he took the care with Spider-Man. And they said that his cameo in Spider-Man was just such a heartfelt and such a warm thing to see. So I'm excited to see that. But just overall, just like Stan Lee has been just like an excellent Stan Lee has become the hero that we all need to strive to be. And yes, and Bill Maher put out that scathing op-ed about Stan Lee's death isn't significant, but the death of Stan Lee really is the end of an era, because he was such a rich man that you can't help and stop to think, and no pun intended, marvel at what he created. It's just like fantastic. It was like in a sense it was magical what he was able to accomplish in this short time on Earth. If you wanna learn more about Stan Lee, I would suggest downloading the Marvel Unlimited app, where you can go back and browse and view all the comics that Stan Lee has written or has any part of. It was basically everything. And yeah, that's about it. Yeah, this is a short podcast. I think there's nothing more that I could say, but just like rest in peace to Stan Lee. It's well deserved. Make sure you are following me at One Marcus Flowers on all social media platforms. Follow Morgan at MetroMeta26. Follow 26 and Glencoe on Twitter at 26andG. Follow us on Twitter at 26 and Glencoe. And like our Facebook page at 26 and Glencoe Media Network. Like I said in the beginning of the podcast, make sure you listen to our latest edition of Dust Off the Cartridge, Super Flow Bros, Metro Meta, and coming up, we have an in-depth Pokemon Let's Go Eevee, Let's Go Pikachu discussion. We also have our winter video game brawl, where Morgan and I will be fighting on different games such as WWE 2K, Tekken, Dragon Ball Z Fighter, Pokemon, of course, Ultimate Injustice 2, and other games. So until next time, peace.